The unspoken word, although it was mentioned once or twice, is nuclear. It has to be a huge part of the portfolio. You can't talk about France's decarbonizing without its 80% portfolio of nuclear generation. So we need to work on that from our side too, because we don't have a very consistent message to nuclear power in our country right now. With that, Madam Chairman, I'll yield back.
So let me start out on the technology neutral approach. Dr. Hausker, you covered this in your testimony. Could you just explain why we should take a technology neutral approach to comprehensive climate policy?
Yes, I think I'll contrast it to there are some very serious people in the climate policy community who would like us to commit to 100% renewable energy as the solution. And then there's another group of equally serious people that say we should take a technology neutral approach, leaving the door open to things like nuclear and carbon capture on fossil fuels. And the reason that I am in the camp of a technology neutral approach is that we are likely to hit some obstacles if we try to lock in just a narrow set of technologies, just renewables only. It may be possible to supply all the world's needs with 100% renewable. One can't predict the future with certainty, but it is much less risky to invest in multiple technologies that can get us there as long as we manage all of the environmental issues. There are not only just CO2, but there's other issues related to fossil fuel extraction and combustion. With nuclear, we need to make sure the plants are safe and that we can safely store the waste and control proliferation problems. But particularly, it will be very difficult to keep costs affordable and go to 100% renewables. We can go deeper into that if the committee wishes.
All right. I wanted to ask some of the others about this too, but I have to get to natural gas. So if anyone else wants to briefly comment and answer the question about the technology neutral approach. Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, may I just add a couple points to Carl's comment? First of all, as I set out in my testimony, I would go a little farther and say the vast majority of studies that have looked at the electricity sector have concluded that firm zero carbon energy, non-weather dependent, whether it's nuclear or carbon capture, is going to bring costs down. And there are some outlier studies that suggest that, but I would say that that is a distinct minority of the studies out there. Second point is, renewables are great for electricity, not entirely clear how you decarbonize cement, steel, or how you decarbonize all of heavy freight with renewable energy. So there's some, even if you could do 100% electricity, 100% renewable on the electricity grid, there are other sectors to worry about.
But do you all believe that nuclear power is a key part of the solution here? Just sort of yes or no, if you could.
I will say yes, both the existing plants have a role to play, and I think with sufficient RD&D, we could probably bring a new generation.
Like you referenced with NuScale, yeah.
Members of Kirk look at the diverse generation portfolio, so that includes nuclear.
Okay, Mr. Cohen?
Yes, but there's a lot of work to do.
Right. Dr. Cletus?
Nuclear power can play a role, but UCS has long been a nuclear safety watchdog, and safety must be central to how we deploy nuclear power.
Right.
One of the things I didn't hear, I heard some about nuclear, but I didn't really get the impression that there was as much enthusiasm about nuclear as I think we all need to look at. We're not going to produce baseload power. I think it was Mr. Cohen, you had the chart to show California's examples. We're not going to produce enough power on a cost-effective basis by using 100% renewables. If we really want to have baseload power, we need to look at nuclear. Another thing we need to look at is the land use impact of renewables. For instance, for every acre it takes to produce nuclear power, it takes 3.5 acres to produce this equivalent amount of solar. And it takes 5.7 to produce acres to produce the same amount of wind, and 25.3 acres to produce the same amount of hydro. And the only one of those that's conceivably close to being baseload is hydro. So we need to look, I think, more broadly at nuclear. That's the reason we had the Advanced Nuclear Fuels Act to fuel the next generation of reactors that passed the House in the last Congress. It's also passed this committee, and hopefully it'll pass the entire Congress will be signed by the President in this Congress.
Mr. Cohen, I want to get to you very quickly before my time runs out, because I wanted to ask you, you made, in your testimony, you said the American grid is a third carbon-free between wind, solar, nuclear, and hydro. And in the state of Georgia, just north of my district, we're the only place in the country that's building 2 nuclear reactors at this time. So I feel like nuclear is a big part of what our future holds in the way of clean energy. And I just wanted to ask you, do you think we should be placing more of an emphasis on nuclear power, especially when you consider its stability and its output?
Yes, absolutely. I actually sit on the board of an organization called the Nuclear Innovation Alliance that has exactly that objective. There's a lot of work to do in terms of cheaper, faster, and more efficient reactors. We won't go into the Georgia situation. There were some important lessons learned.
Yeah.
But yes, that we absolutely, having that in our toolkit would be an enormous step forward.
And you're right, there's a lot of work left to do, but I would submit that perhaps the biggest work left for us to do and the largest obstacle and barrier for us to get over is just public acceptance of it. And how do we do that?
Well, I think cost is going to be an issue too. I think we need to prove that we can bring these things on time and at budget or anywhere close to budget. But I do think public acceptance is important. I do think that's changing, by the way. My generation probably was inclined against the technology. I talk to younger people who think climate is way more important than whatever concern they might have around the nuclear technology.
Yeah.
I think it's shifting very rapidly.
I hope you're right. Thank you, and I yield back.
So, thinking about electrical generation, let's shift gears and put the second slide up. I want to talk about nuclear energy and the important role it plays in the all of the above energy matrix. Now, my home state of South Carolina has 7 nuclear power reactors. They produce 95% of the state's emission-free electricity, 53% of our total electricity. In my district, Oconee Nuclear Station has 3 nuclear reactors. Let's just talk about one of those. 3 nuclear reactors provide 2,550 megawatts of carbon-free, continuous, always-on power for South Carolina, North Carolina. If we replace the Oconee Nuclear Station, which uses less than 2 square miles, with solar, it would require 107 square miles of land, nearly 4 times the size of our largest city in upstate Greenville. If we replace Oconee Nuclear Station with wind power, that will require over 854 square miles of land. That's more land than the entire county of Anderson, my largest county in my district. So this slide shows how you would replace one nuclear reactor that's 1,154 megawatts with wind. It would take 2,077 windmills, and there are 2,077 windmills on this graph. 2,077 windmills, 2 megawatt wind generators, to replace one solar reactor. Think about the land mass that would take to provide the wind power for that one reactor. Nuclear power is emission-free. Mr. Cohen, how can we further more nuclear power to lessen our carbon emission as part of this energy matrix?
Yeah, that's probably a subject for another hearing. I would just say there are 3 things. One is let's get on with the RD&D demonstration of the next generation of reactors that will be less expensive and faster to build. Secondly, we need to address the U.S. waste problem, and well, those 2 would be a good running start.
Well, you mentioned earlier some of the things that are hampering nuclear power. In South Carolina, we were building 2 more nuclear reactors, and the company had to stop because regulations by the government during the construction process, not during the permit approval process, during the construction process, changed so much that the cost went up, and that had to be mothballed. So now we're not having that nuclear power generation to meet our future electrical needs. How do we overcome the regulatory environment within a cost-benefit application that will support the growth of the nuclear industry?
We've been supporting much more performance-based regulation. I do think the situation in South Carolina is a little more complicated than that. It's probably a subject of another hearing. There's a lot of blame to go around on that. I don't
In a
think
5-minute, we have to, you can't be that complicated.
I don't think the NRC bears all the
The gentleman's
blame in that
time has
situation.
expired.